let's give it a second. Oh, there we go. Magic. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Ash. I am a user experience design leader. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about UI design, so a little bit different from what my day-to-day. But this has been a talk that a lot of devs and front ends and BAs and PMs have asked me to do, so I created this for that reason. Is my mic going back and forth? Can you guys? We're good? Okay. Cool. All right. Just a quick plug for my employer. I work for Valorum Reply. They do have positions open. We are an Italian consulting firm. We do stuff in Europe. We do stuff in America, primarily in the AI and robotic security software development workspaces. All right. So today what we're going to go through some basic terms. We're going to have a brief discussion about design libraries. Then we're going to go into the meat, which is visual design principles, UI principles, and then we'll talk a little bit about layouts. I do want to give a disclaimer here. This talk is very basic for visual principles, a little bit of brain stuff, and aesthetics. It is not going to replace any design, UX, or art degrees. It's not going to give you coding tips. It's not all-encompassing. This is a very much a kind of a high-touch talk. However, if you are a visual designer or UX designer, you're probably going to be bored and judgmental. So I look forward to reading your comments. All right, so first confession on my part, I'm not a designer. When I first got out of university, I was a human-computer interaction major with emphasis in human factors engineering and ergonomics, okay? And so I joined my first company, and we did this project called the Star Map. And I was like, okay, great. You know, in college, you learn, you've got your team, right? You've got your UX researcher, your UX designer, your tester, your visual designer, your architect, your business analyst, your developers, your quality assurance. You got all these people coming together and making a great product. And so I got started, and I said, hey, where's the visual designer? And they said, oh, yeah, that's you. And I was like, oh, no. Because I'm an interaction designer, or I was. So turned out that actually of all these people, I was all of these roles. It was just me and a mustache, right? So I had to learn to wear a lot of different hats or mustaches, if you would, to do this role. I also had an architect, which I then learned architects are all crazy. And amazing people to work with. They're like the Oprahs of the tech space. And that I was overwhelmed with developers. So my team had all been kind of consolidated into these roles. So what I want you to get from this is sometimes we learn things out of necessity because we're told that we should. So let's do it. We're going to just go through some really basic terms. The first one is, what is graphic design? It's essentially how to communicate visually through imagery, right? Interaction design is creating interactive digital products, services, and systems. And then UX design is essentially all that, but it's creating research-grounded, goal-oriented interactive experiences. So that research-grounded, goal-oriented often gets kind of pushed aside for a lot of folks, and really they want to just focus on the UI. They want to get a UI developer. They want to get a UI, UX designer, et cetera. And oftentimes what they mean is, I want you to make it pretty. Thank you. Make it pretty. So this is the pretty talk. When we talk about usability, that's the degree to which something can be used. Accessibility, something can be accessed, and user experience is the overall experience in regard to what the user is trying to do. It's how well we match that. All right, does everybody feel level and set? Good. I'm getting a few head shakes. All right. So design libraries help facilitate that UI because they're essentially the bricks, the Lego bricks of the UI world. And I would say they are just like Lego bricks. They are common and reusable. They're design elements, they have usage rules, they have code snippets, and you can see them in these design systems. You might have the Fluent design system or Material. You might have your own that you built in-house. They generally have some sort of style guides of how you're supposed to use it. You might have a branding guide, color guides to go along with them. And then you generally have a library of components. Maybe you keep it in your storybook, or you have Figma components that you work off of. So it's all in there, right? You don't have to think too much. You can just pull the piece off and use it. You don't have to 3D print a new block every time. You don't have to code up something new. You have standards, right? So the most common question I get from developers is, okay, I've got these things, but what do I do now? And the same thing with designers, like, what do I do now? Because the Lego bricks aren't enough. Just because you have all the storybook elements that you can pull in and use, it doesn't mean that you're using them in the right way. So when I say they're like Lego bricks, I mean they're exactly like Lego bricks. We've got these Lego croissants, right? So they're used for the bakery set, right? They're so that your Lego person can get a delicious croissant and live their best life, right? However, we use them in a lot of different ways that would be considered non-standard. Sir, this isn't a barbershop, it's a bakery. What are you doing? So we see this with Lego bricks, and it's great for Lego bricks, the artistry, amazing. But when you start doing this with UI components, things just start to fall on their face, right? Take this, what does this look like for Lego? Pew pew, oh, pew pew, excellent. I was like, oh, we're gonna get demonetized on YouTube. Okay, it's a pew pew. So it's like, oh no, sir, don't turn on that record player. You're gonna blow a hole through the floor, right? So when we look at Lego components, we can use them in new and different ways. We put them in different contexts. They look different. They perform in different meanings. But if your expectations are when you see that, you assume that something is going to be fired from the end of it, barrel round, it starts to mess with your mind of, like, now that I see that it's here, over here, it's this over there, et cetera, et cetera. So let's talk about consistency. And with UI components, it's really important that users start to build trust in your system, and that they know that when they're in your system, everything's going to be cohesive. This button on one page doesn't mean something else on another. This type of styling on one page doesn't mean something else on another. So when we talk about consistency, the main thing we're talking about are those standards, and what we really want to look at is that harmony. However, consistency can only take you so far. But let's give you an example of consistency. Does anyone know what this brand is? You guys are so quiet. McDonald's, thank you. It is McDonald's. However would you know, right? So McDonald's, it's been around since the 1940s. Dick and Mac McDonald's created it. It was then bought by Ray Kroc in the 50s, and he decided to make these golden arches, and they standardized their menu, and they were flipping fast, right? And now, whether you're in Omaha, Nebraska, gonna stop by, or you're in Times Square, you know when you come to a McDonald's, pretty much what you're gonna get, what the experience is gonna be like. But the fundamental issue with consistency is inconsistency. So that's when something just doesn't quite feel right. You're like, wait a second, that's not McDonald's. So inconsistency creates dissonance. You don't go to McDonald's because you want the best hamburger in the business, right? You go to McDonald's because you know what you're gonna get. And sometimes when the kids are screaming in the backseat of the car and you're on a long road trip, you just want to know that they're gonna have something that they can eat and they're not gonna throw it at you, okay? All right, so now that we're all consistent, let's talk about accessibility. Now, I'm gonna very briefly go over accessibility. It's not the heart of this talk, but essentially, when we're looking at accessibility in UI design, we're talking about touch, type, and mouse. When we're talking about UI design. Now, I am not talking about anything that doesn't have to do with the eye, because we're talking specifically about visual design today. However, accessibility is all-encompassing. You don't need to have eyes to use a product, so I highly recommend you go to other accessibility talks that talk about that, screen readers and that sort of thing. However, when we're talking about this, we're talking about tab order, screeners, yes. alt descriptions, contrast, zoom handling, touch sizes, touch forgiveness, visibility, system status, navigational awareness, all that stuff, right? All of that has to do with accessibility. Visual design is for your eye. So what I'm going to be specifically talking about is what your eyes are doing on this page. So all that other stuff, please go to another talk. It's very, very important. WCAG all the way, but this is only going to be about visual design. So how we read. So we generally read in an F pattern or an L pattern. So you can kind of see, this is a heat map. It's used, an eye tracker tracks where your pupils are going. And essentially, where it's hotter is where your eyes spend more time. So in the United States, we generally read left to right, top to bottom. When you're internationalizing, you need to internationalize for that culture, so make sure you know which way they read. But this is kind of the standard we stick to. But you can play with that if you know UI principles, or visual design principles. So, did it start playing in your head? I might need to update my references because I think I'm getting old. But this is Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba. Classic 90s hit, I think. But what we did here was I tried to direct your attention by using size, boldness, and color. So the intended design of this is I get knocked down, but I get up again. You ain't ever gonna, and then you go right back up to keep me down, and then maybe you go here to Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba. And the way I did that, I played with it because you're supposed to read top to bottom, left to right. How many people started with keep me down? I see no hands. Now, sometimes I do get hands. Some people are like cool that way. But for the most part, using visual design principles, you can trick the brain and the eye into focusing on what you want to focus on. This is extremely important with cognitive visibility. How many times has a user called in and been like, hey, or put in a ticket, hey, this isn't on the page, but it is on the page. But they just couldn't see it, right? That happens a lot. And that often is, there's some sort of a visual design problem, there's some sort of a usability problem on that screen, that it is not cognitively visible, meaning it is tucked away, or there's so much noise on the screen they couldn't see it, or there's a word that they were expecting, a keyword that they were searching for, or some sort of logo or something that is not meeting their expectations, and so it is invisible to them. It's on the page, but it's invisible. So let's first talk about hierarchy. This is a pretty common concept. It's essentially just arranging elements by importance. And generally, we show importance by how big you are. I am 5'4", so therefore I'm low importance. Just kidding. But when we do visual design, it's generally, bigness, boldness is how we are doing our design. So we have your different header sizes, and you can see as they go down by importance, and they go down by your visual capture, they start getting smaller, they often get less bold. So the reason that we do this is because there's a lot of things that can grab your attention. So size is one of them, but contrast is another. So using opposites to emphasize in design. Right now, which one of these circles do you want to look at? Are they all equal to you? Yeah, they're all equal. How about now? Which one do you want to look at now? Yeah, the second one. Because it's now different. So now it's not that we applied that style to it, it's that we applied something different. We have created a contrast, we've made that thing important. And all I'm doing is changing shapes and colors. I haven't added any context of what any of this means, but your eye knows, just by looking at it, what's important on that screen. So one of the things that I'd like to tell you straight away is when you're looking at your designs, sometimes it's best to step back, and apparently down, and just kind of look at it without, maybe get the squint test, without reading any of the material on the page. What are you drawn to? What do you think your calls to action are? Just out of colors and sizing and format. Doing that will dramatically increase the visibility of what's important on your page. The next thing we want to talk about is color. So color, we do want to use sparingly and with specificity. You don't want to just be throwing color everywhere. You also want to make sure you want to test it for contrast and accessibility. So you can see a bad contrast and a good contrast. This is the bane of my existence for menu design. I don't know if you've ever been at a fast food restaurant or a restaurant and you're just like, mother, how old am I? And you just can't read it because they decided to put red on blue and you're like, ooh. So anyway, make sure you're testing it. There are a ton of different tools out there to test your contrast. Follow WCAG guidelines, but generally for normal size text, you want to do 4.5 to 1, and for larger text, you can do 3 to 1. But you generally want to get higher than that. The higher it is, the easier it is for you to read. It draws attention, but it also adds noise. So if you have a bunch of things shouting at you, it's going to be really hard to distinguish which one you want to look at, right? So it can also impact your mood. There's a lot of different color theory. I'm not going to get into color theory in this talk, but essentially the type of coloring that you have can impact the mood that you're going to set with your audience, and can cause a physiological response. Color theory is very cool. We're not going to get into it, but I highly recommend that you look at it if you'd like. Iconography, also extremely important part of language. It's essentially symbols used to communicate a state or an action. It's a pictorial language. Now, with the web, we've started creating our own pictorial language. As a technologist, you'll start picking up more and more of these. But as a layperson, sometimes these look a little funky. Like this one is a commonly used one, but it really kind of looks like a Q with a long nose, if you don't know that that's a magnifying glass, right? So when we do these pictorial languages, it's important to remember that we're trying to stay consistent throughout. So you don't want to have like the fancy magnifying glass, and you don't want to add an eye on your Q with a nose, right? You want to try to be consistent across. So when we're looking at these universal icons, the search icon, the marker, the trash can, we don't want to get too cute with these things. We want to make sure that we're staying consistent with what others are using, because we're speaking a pictorial language. If your trash can is something, Oscar the Grouch is hanging out in there, that actually might be cool. But you just need to make sure that you're being consistent. With system icons, there's a lot of different treatments. You want to make sure that when you're on your hover states and your selected states that you'll be checking those contrasts so you can still see it, but you can also see the hover state, the disabled state. I tend not to use disabled very often because I am more of the Google line where if you click on something and it doesn't work, it tells you why it doesn't work and how to enable it. The Microsoft line is, I don't want to bother you and tell you that it's hard. I'm just going to like disable it, and now you can't click on it, which is good. You know you can't use it, but it's also bad because you have no idea how to enable it. So there's two different lines of thought. Both have valid. I don't want to, Microsoft's good, Google's good. Please don't hate me, y'all. They're just two different thoughts, right? But there's also things that are less than universal, right? So I'm going to give you a quick quiz. All right, so here are some real icons. I want you to tell me what they mean. All right, first one, what does that mean? No, it means IT support. The second one, what does that mean? No, it means find the next golden bachelor. No, I'm kidding. It's the personalize button. All right. Third one, business work. Yes, it's the job board. And that one? Library records. It's internal audit, so close. And that one? Clearly. Come on, guys. So why does this happen? A lot of times this happens because when we're talking about pictorial language, it really depends on who is picking out that pictorial language. And two, not everyone's a graphic designer. I'm certainly not. So we try to utilize the things that we already have. So we say, well, what do we have in our font icon library? This one looks close enough. I could see, Wi-Fi, IT support, perfect, right? And so this is what happens. So it's very important that when you're using an icon font, that you're using the font the way it's supposed to, like the fabric icon font, for example, or the Sego icon font, or the Roboto. However, if you do not have something that matches, then it's generally time to either make a new icon or don't use an icon. Has anybody ever considered not using an icon? Yes, because we don't need icons for everything, especially if the icon doesn't make any sense. The next thing is balance. So everything on the page has some sort of weight. So we talked about how things can take your attention. They can also help balance the page, bring it at an equilibrium, make you feel comfortable. So in this case, we are distributing these two identically. On this case, we're also distributing them on this line. But you can actually play with that. You can decide where your line is. You can actually build in asymmetry to make your page have tension. But you need to be doing that consciously. Otherwise, it's going to cause an uneasiness. So let's say that you're designing for the AMC and you have a new spooky Fright Night. Instead of using symmetry in your design, you would probably want to use some asymmetry. You want to make some tension. You want to make the user like, why do I feel uncomfortable, right? Then we're going to talk about gestalt. It's how our brains logically group information. So we group it by 4 main things. There's actually more principles of gestalt, but these are my 4 main. The other ones I think get a little bit pedantic, but they're still good. Sorry, visual designers, don't hate me. Proximity, common region, unity, and continuity. So proximity is just how close we are together, right? When things are close, we assume they're grouped together. What is this grouping? Do you see one group of 1? Do you see 4 groups of 4? Now, when you see those 4 groups of 4, do you see them like this? Yes. What if I intended to make them like that? Then you did a bad job. You'd probably want to do something like this. It's so simple. All I'm showing you is circles. But because of proximity, your brain has decided they go together. They're just circles. So that's why I'm trying to tell you, before you even look at the context of your screen, you need to zoom out. Same thing with common region. Items appearing to share the same region are grouped. These are all in a common region. How about now? How many regions do I have? How about now? Exactly. Your brain just figures it out. I can do the same thing with unity. Items that have the same characteristics are grouped. So I know based on color. I know based on shape. I know based on size. And in continuity, items on the same line or curve are grouped. In this case, I'm going to assume the first row and then second. But I can also carry that on arches. I can carry that on angles. I can do a lot of cool stuff with continuity. I would recommend consulting a professional, but you can do it, and it's because your brain understands. So now that we understand the basics of Gestalt, we've got the basic visual principles, how our brains kind of work in, let's talk about the design elements, the pieces that we need. So there's this design language idea called atomic design. And I think you can get a free ebook on it. It's pretty interesting. But essentially, it's about parts making the whole. So there are atoms, molecules, and organisms. And so in this case, an atom might be the hand. It's just one component. But then when you add, see the 2 legs to the leg base, that would be a molecule, because it's the pelvis and the 2 legs that's making your leg base. And then the organism itself is the minifigure, right? And when we're looking at our design library, they're all composed of atoms, molecules, and organisms. So just to kind of give you an example of these things, when I'm just looking at this, just go with this card component, right? So I've got a bunch of different atoms in here. I've got a headline atom, I've got a body atom, I've got labels, I've got buttons, I've got iconography, and I've got images. And then when I'm putting them together, like these 2 buttons, I have a button row. And so that would be considered potentially a molecule, and together it could be an organism. All right, so for text, text is a little bit tricky. Obviously, UX writing is important. However, we're not talking about how you're writing. We're only talking about what you're seeing as far as visual. So you might have your heading, you have your body, you have another body. Generally, when you start mushing things together, things get harder and harder to read. So the space you don't use is just as important as the space that you do. So we can clean this up a little bit. We made our heading bold because it's more important, it's summary. We added a little bit of spacing between the paragraphs to give a little bit of stretch to your brain so you can see that there is differentiation. But you can overdo it and you can underdo it, right? In this case, this is a red, kind of underdoing it. Things are too close. Green, this is about right. But as I said, you can also overdo it, where you're giving just too much space between things. Like the space between those yellow spaces, those are still fine. But when you're starting to get that much space pulling apart, it's looking like you're trying to turn in an essay that you didn't quite allot enough time to, right? And it just becomes harder for your eyes to track things. So there is definitely a sweet spot, and you can definitely play with that sweet spot. The more, and you'll see this a lot on tables, there's definitely a sweet spot for tables that you do want enough padding, and you have to balance that with the need for data on the screen. With fields, those are the interactive elements on the page, your inputs, your toggles. Each of those should have specific padding choices, and they should be consistent. So if you're on a 4-pixel grid, everything should be multiplied by 4. I know some people are starting to really hone in on we should do it by Fibonacci sequence. That's great. Designers aren't good at math. So, well, me as a designer, not good at math. So I don't do Fibonacci sequence. I do the 4 picks, and it's great. But whatever you do, make sure you are consistent. So with the user interfaces, let's talk about priority first. So knowing what's most important to your users and what order in which they need it. Now we're starting to kind of scooch into the UX side of the talk, okay? I know I said I wouldn't talk UX, but I can't help myself. So the most important data, according to your user and your business, because you kind of have to look at that overlap, and you are ordering it accordingly, okay? So most important is often contrasted somehow, or it's given priority seating on your page, right? The more important, it needs to be above the fold. And when I say the fold, I mean what you can see on your screen before scrolling, okay? Either vertically or horizontally, although I would recommend avoiding horizontal scrolling. If it's somewhat important, it needs to be on the screen somewhere, even if you have to scroll for it. If it's slightly important, generally you want one extra step to find. So you have to click into a menu, or you have to open up an accordion or something. And if it's unimportant, maybe you remove it from the page, or it takes you multiple steps to find it. Because everything can't be on the page, right? So this is your page fold. Important stuff up there, less important stuff below the fold. When we're talking about your flow, that's the user's process. How they think of information. If they think of something from A to B to C to D, your flow on your page should be A to B to C to D. If you're having the user jump around from their mental process to accommodate your business process, it's going to cause dissonance again, and it's going to be uncomfortable to use. And if your competitor is doing it better, they're probably going to want to switch because yours is just uncomfortable. So make sure that you're ordering the items on your screen so that they can go with their flow. You're ordering the pages of your app so they are going with the flow of how they think about how this process. Unless you're going to retrain them in some way, if you're going to do that, the rule that I stick to is if it's not 3 times better, it's worse. That's because when you have to learn a new thing, it's a pain. So if it's not 3 times better, it's worse. Now, you can't put the entire system on the same page, and you will have stakeholders that say that their thing is the most important. So generally, you back that up with user research. I'm available for consulting. All right. So with navigation, that's how you move around, right? It needs to be clear, consistent. It needs to gracefully handle partial states. So partial state means what happens if I walk away or if I get interrupted and I haven't saved something? What happens? What happens if I'm going through your job application and I need to go back to the next page? Do you remember what I did on that previous page before I clicked the back button? Or do you erase my entire progress, right? I was a recruiter for a long time. It was very annoying. So, also it's remembering previous states. Part of that is kind of that delight, but if you do remember, you also need to make sure you have a reset, just in case they want to get rid of that nonsense. Layout. So this is how all the elements on your screen come together. We're going to do this in boxes again. So when we're talking about layouts, we're talking essentially about grids. Most folks will have a 12-column grid. They'll pick their ideal screen size that they're designing for, do a 12-column grid on it, and then kind of responsively do that grid. Some people set snap points. So essentially they'll set, they might have a set size, and then when you get to another string size, you snap to another point. Other people do it responsively where it's more springy. Essentially, what we're doing is you want to have a gutter on each side of the page, and then you want to have pads in between the columns. So generally the screen size is the gutter size screen size minus gutter size times 2 minus pad times 11 divided by 12 equals your column size. Math. So I am okay with it. And those 12-column grids need to be easily divisible by all these different numbers. So 12 is easily divisible by 2, 3, 4, and 6. So in that case, I can create a lot of different layouts with this column, and it's pretty simple. You can also mix it up, but keep it balanced, so you don't have to do everything the same way. You see I have a 1, a 1, a 2, a 4, and a 2, and a 2. It's still a balanced page. It still lets you feel okay. 2, 2, 4, 2. So I'm just kind of showing you different formats and layouts to show you that you can be comfortable even if you're not symmetrical all the time. As I said, as long as you're balanced, you're okay. A lot of people ask, okay, that's great. What about vertical? Like, we've got a horizontal grid for columns. Do you do like a column grid for vertical too? No, not really. Mainly because users are more comfortable scrolling vertical, especially on phones. So there's no specific column breakout, but it can cause some pain and consternation, especially with forms, when you have form elements that are different sizes. And there's a lot of different ways that you can handle that. But your alignment and spacing are still important. You still want to have a certain minimum pixel between your elements, and that needs to be consistent. So maybe you decide, I'm going to do a 24 or a 32 between my elements. That's going to be, my pad is going to be a 32, and so then my vertical pad is also going to be a 32. And I'll show you what I mean. You also want to try to avoid jagged edges where you can, and think about where the fold on the screen will land. So when I'm talking about this, you can see this is pretty symmetrical page. But what if you have elements that are bigger than others, right? Now you have this jagged section. So you can do several different things with that. You can decide to not keep the lines consistently and let one go into the other. Generally don't recommend that. It can sometimes feel uncomfortable. You can move the elements around so you're grouping things of like size. That only works if the context still works with it. So if these elements shouldn't go together and they need to go with something else, you can't do that, right? You can also try to divide this page into different sections and handle it that way. So there's a lot of different things you can do. There's not a perfect solution. If there was, I'd already be replaced by AI. So a few more years, guys. So you might be asking yourself, okay, I don't understand all this. Let's just tell me what to do. And frankly, I can't, right? But what I can tell you is the space that you don't use is just important as the space that you do. So based on your design library, based on the screen sizes you're designing for, based on the context of the people that are using it, are they vision impaired? Are they using it on a moving surface and they need bigger touch targets, et cetera? You need to decide how big things are going to be, how big your grid needs to be in order to do this. Some people ask about rules, meaning lines. How do I use rules? So in this case, you can use rules to segment things. You can also use group boxes, and you can use other different treatments. So once again, it really depends on what you're trying to convey. But there are a lot of different treatments as we talked about with Gestalt, that your eye will catch and will understand. You do want to limit the use of boxes and other unessential decorative elements. I did work for a company where everything was in a box, like every single section had its own group box, and that can cause some consternation as well. So every element should serve a purpose to enhance and not clutter. As far as affordance goes, affordance is the principle of showing clearly how something can be used. This is an affordance of something in PowerPoint. I was like, where would I get a good example? And then I pulled in a square and I was like, oh, here's a good example of affordance, right? It's those little nodes on the end that's telling you, ooh, touch me, pull me. It's the circulars, letting you know that you can rotate it around. That affordance shows you how things can be used. With buttons, those are triggers for actions. The buttons are probably one of my pet peeves. You want to clearly name it for a specific action. You want to be consistent. So if you're using, you want to be using consistent language throughout. You want to be concise and you want to be brand aligned, okay? So when I say brand aligned, meaning your tone that you're using works. Like you would not say adventure forth for like Adobe XD or I don't know, what do you guys use? ADO. Probably wouldn't make sense. But making sure that your buttons and your brand match is very important. Buttons, depending on how they are, they can be text-based, outline contained. If you have a button that's considered a primary element, that's generally like the most eye-catching button. In this case, that would be the dark blue button. Primary buttons should only be used once on a page. Essentially, if you're like, if I'm going to hit enter, that's the button it's going to trigger. That's how you know that's your primary button, right? And it can be context-based, based on where your cursor focus is. You can switch context, but you're only showing one primary button at a time. But that primary button can move based on where the user is. That's fine, but you can't show more than one, because if I click enter, I need to know what's going to happen. You generally use secondary buttons for secondary actions, then tertiary buttons for things that are even less important and you want less attention to. Links are not buttons. Who wants to argue with me? Come see me outside. So a link is not an action, it is a navigation. You're going somewhere. External links should be marked, and you should generally underline links. It's an accessibility thing. I know it looks 90s, but it is accessibility because generally you want to double encode links in some way for accessibility. Blue is standard, but you can also use branded colors. If your branded colors are things like red, just be cautious about that because that might signal to the user something nefarious. I'm going to go ahead and skip through this because it's lunch time, but essentially, and I already kind of went over through responsive, adaptive, and static. I've got this really cool GIF. Woo! Oh. You can download my slides at ux-ash.com with the password, thanks for coming. So we're just going to skip all this, and we're going to go to questions. To wrap it up, when it comes to your eye, content is secondary. Your brain makes judgments based on layouts, shapes, and colors first. I don't like being photographed in front of this slide because as a UXer, content and context is like the main thing for me. But when it comes to how your brain is first perceiving that information visually, it's all these other things first. So just keep that in mind. So, don't clap for me yet. I clapped for me. No, sorry. The goal, sorry, I did it. The goal is usable software. This is about this much of it, right? Visual design is a huge thing. I gave you a couple other things to look at, color theory, Gestalt, all that other stuff. Dig in. I'm Ash. You can get my slides at ux-ash.com. And now I'm ready for your questions. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It can be really like uneven, but having like the reactable things where if you hover over it, then it would expand out to its full size.
So,
can you repeat the question?
So yeah, I will repeat the question. So when you have elements on your pages that are different sizes and it can look uneven, what if you have kind of like a grow? is basically what you're saying. So first off, I don't want to say that you can't have different things on your screens that are different sizes that are uneven. It just needs to be done consciously so that you're drawing attention to it. As far as growing, that is perfectly fine. However, you need to be very conscious of why you're doing it, because when something starts to move on a page, one, it's not, the user may not understand that that is what's happening. They might think that they're doing something to the page. Two, it can start pushing other elements. So if I'm moving my mouse across the page, I need to make sure that you might have a certain wait time before it starts doing that, because it might move the element that I'm trying to click over, and then that's going to cause immediate frustration. So just something to keep in mind. But yes, you can do that, but yes, make sure you know why. Yes, it's jarring, yes. Any other questions? Are you guys hungry? Yes.
When you were talking about contrast, you mentioned a ratio of like 4.5 to 1 or 3 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? I didn't understand.
So when we're talking about WCAG compliance and contrast, the 4.5 to 1 to 3 to 1, it's essentially the minimum contrast ratios between the two different colors. So you can have, there's a variety of tools that allow you to basically click on your background and your foreground and then see the difference between those. And essentially it's just the bigger the number, the better, because it's showing you higher contrast. The smaller the number, the more closely aligned they are. It's saying this is 3 times different than this. This is 4.5 times different than this, right? So this is the same as this, right? So it's kind of like the degrees in which they are similar. And yeah, the more contrast, the better. You can't overdo contrast. A black and a white can be very jarring for the user. It can cause eye strain. So you don't want to go for like 100% contrast. So if you are doing like a dark mode, instead of using a straight black, you might want to, be like 80% black. And instead of using a straight white, maybe you're only 80% white. Like, check your ratios. And you can generally feel it happening to your eyes. So pay attention to that. Yes. Oh wait, sorry. I already got you. I'm going to come back to you. Yes. Yes.
I learned a word today, consternation. And it really describes things. I don't know. I looked it up, and I was curious if you had off the hand like resources about that particular.
So the question is, the word consternation, cool word. Where did you? What was the question? Sorry. How do you address what consternation is, or what it could be to the user? That's kind of something you build a feel for. Unfortunately, I really felt that through usability testing, eye tracking, that sort of stuff. So it's something that honestly you kind of develop over time. But oftentimes, the squint test is a very easy test. Oftentimes showing it to a colleague, doing some quick and dirty usability testing where maybe you can't use a user, maybe you use someone from a different department so that they can start to identify things that don't quite make sense. That's really good ways to figure that out. We're losing people and it is lunchtime, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time and attention. If you have any more questions, come see me.